welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And this week, we're talking about Game Night. This is the new comedy from Jason Bateman and company. I know we're a couple weeks out on this one, but it was either this or Tomb Raider, and...
You didn't really care about Tomb Raider, did you? Like, come on. Like, nobody wants to hear us talk about Tomb Raider. So let's talk about wacky murder mystery instead.
Yeah. It's been getting good reviews, better than Tomb Raider by far. It was, in my personal opinion, a relatively enjoyable movie. Not necessarily my style of comedy, but you know what? The significant other enjoyed it, and I certainly didn't hate it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a little bit more than you did, I think. I also went with my significant other, and I think it makes for a good date night movie. It's fun. It moves pretty quickly after the beginning. There's some good jokes, some good set pieces, and what I really appreciate about it most, to keep it sort of brief and spoiler free, because you don't want to spoil comedy, because that ruins the whole point of the joke. But the thing I appreciate about this movie and comedies like it is that even if an individual joke doesn't always land, there's enough to the filmmaking, there's enough to the story, there's enough to it where I am at least consistently entertained and engaged in what's going on. Whereas there are a lot of comedies where they just sort of move from set piece to set piece without much in the way of connective tissue, like an Adam Sandler schlock horrible nightmare film. And in those movies where it's just joke after joke after joke without much of a backbone, it's a nightmare because you'll be stuck in this extended sequence, praying for death, praying for it all to end, and then you'll move on to the next one, and it's just an isolated hodgepodge of nonsense. But with this movie, again, even if not every joke made me laugh out loud, although there were a few that did, quite a few times, it still kept me consistently engaged, kept me consistently entertained. Recommend going to see it. At the tail end of its run here. Think it's worth your time, especially with a date, some friends. It's a good social little movie. It has its job, it has its place in the world, and it does it well. So
yeah, absolutely. Once again, by no means did I hate it. I don't think it necessarily grabbed me in the comedic sense. I enjoyed watching the plot itself unfurl, which was surprisingly a little bit more deep than I was expecting, but not, we were discussing a potential plot twist, my significant other and I, and at the end of the movie, I'm like, I don't know that this movie was smart enough to get there. So take from that what you will, but it's as Jackson said, it's a really good movie to go hang out with. Just grab some popcorn. If you go to a theater that has a bar, pick up a beer, go watch the movie. You'll have a good time. Nothing wrong with that.
All right, I guess we're gonna get into spoilers now. That's our general sense. So if you do care about seeing it, or if you don't care, or you just want to hear the melodious sounds of our voices, then keep listening, dear listener.
Because we are getting into the ASMR segment of this podcast, where we're going to be discussing in very subdued tones the pathways and tribulations of date night, game night.
of Date Movie, that classic comedy from the mid-2000s.
Yeah, I forgot about that one already, as the rest of the world did, and as the rest of the world should. I can't believe that you remember it.
Speaking the title as Date Night, I think triggered something primal in my brain of that teaser I would see on commercials of a guy doing a horrible Napoleon Dynamite impression, and yeah, so you've unlocked something in me, I think.
You get that 2005 when you're watching Adult Swim and it pops up and you're just kind of like, oh, and even as 13 you recognize that it looks terrible.
At that point, you've already outgrown Date Movie.
It's done. It's gone. Like, your audience is 8-year-olds who still think that farts are the funniest thing ever put to film. And don't get me wrong, farts are still funny, just not on film. There's a time and a place for everything, and gross out humor doesn't belong on fucking anything that should records anything ever.
Well said.
I'm taking a hard... you know what? This is where we're opening up this episode on. Hard stance, gross out humor fucking sucks.
You know...
I mean, can you name, like, one time that you've watched somebody, like, diarrhea all over someone else in their mouth or something like that, and you're like, ha ha ha, what a good time. That man just contracted Ebola.
No, not in that specific instance. I'm trying to think. I don't think off the top of my head, but there was maybe. I'm sure that there was like one gross out part in something like The Wolf of Wall Street that I laughed at one point. Like I'm sure that it's happened.
You know what? Like that's entirely plausible. And like The Wolf of Wall Street though is also like a crafted movie.
Yeah, well that's the thing. That is Martin Scorsese we're talking about here.
But like even like light gross out humor, like. Have you seen Paul Blart Mall Cop 2? We're going to talk about this for a second.
I have not seen Paul Blart Mall Cop 2.
I've seen it 5 times, I think.
Why have you seen it 5 times?
If you are familiar with the McElroy family and the products that they put out, you'll know why. They do a podcast every Thanksgiving until the end of linear time about Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. And I've watched it every year, and I watched it 2 or 3 times this year because I hate myself. And the worst part is I watch it with my significant other, and every time I stay awake the entire fucking movie, and she's asleep about half an hour in. And it is miserable. But there is one part of it that is like somehow both the grossest thing I've ever seen and not gross at all, where the joke of the movie is that Kevin James is a heavyset man. That is
a brilliant, astute observation on the part of Paul Blart Mall Cop 2.
Oh yeah. It is the crux of the movie. Insofar as he has diabetes, and he is at one point running down a hallway and just gives out. He's like, oh, I've got low blood sugar. And to re-energize, he sees a strawberry ice cream cone that's melting in this little girl's hand as she's being held by her father. So he takes some time to crawl over to it and then roll onto his back and look up. And for lack of a better term, he gets a strawberry ice cream bukkake.
Oh.
It's the worst experience ever put to film. It sucks so much, and I hate it, and I've seen it like 7 times.
Well, Sean's a horrible masochism aside. Game Night is not a film like that. There's only one. You know what though? Actually, I did think there is kind of a gross out scene in this. It's the one with the dog. The one where we're getting way ahead of ourselves. But the premise of the movie is that Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams are a married couple who are super competitive at games. Jason Bateman has this like shitty older brother who sets up this game night to like rub in his face how much better he is. Except then it turns out that he's involved in some shady shit. And his brother gets kidnapped, and they have to solve like the actual mystery, like actually find him while they're getting involved in all these like drug dealers and criminal organizations and stuff. And basically, that's the premise. Game Night has spun out of control, and so at one point, in order to find the culprit, I don't remember the exact context of why they need his name, but they go to like the police officer neighbor's house, and they're playing like Jenga with him, and Jason Bateman, like, oh, I gotta go to the bathroom. He runs to the bathroom to like try and log into his computer to see what's going on. So, and then this whole time from an earlier scene, he's got a bullet hole wound, and is dripping blood from it, which summons the tiny little white dog from the police officer's other room. And it starts with the dog just like trying to like lick up the blood, and eventually he starts dripping blood onto this pure white dog, and is trying to like smear it off, and ends up just making the dog look like a complete like nightmare creature. And I did laugh at this scene, not because there was just like blood spewing everywhere, but because, and this is what I think the movie does really well, but because this part of the scene is put well in context, and it's good at sort of like escalating the tension of the moment. Like, so you have the creepy police officer guy, and he's got like a shrine to his ex-wife, and there, and then like things just get worse and worse and worse with the dog, and he ends up like ruining the whole room, and ends up like trying to wipe off the blood with like this creepy shirt that the police officer guy has. It's like pure white, and just a bunch of stuff like that. So for me, like, what could have been a just like a gross out moment of just isn't it gross that the dog is like drinking the blood, or isn't it gross that the dog is covered in the blood? What I think this scene does well is take that basic premise and then like let every little beat that's in it sort of like sink in, like let you really appreciate like oh no, like we get the shot of like the dog coming in, like, oh, like there's sort of our complication, like what's gonna happen with the dog, get the dog like licking up the blood, like, oh gross, he ends up dripping it on the dog, and it sort of ratchets up from there until by the end the creepy room is ruined, and he just has to be like, oh well, and just like make his escape. And with the execution and the way this scene ends up sort of progressing, as well as just as far as like a gross image, I did think that like smearing all of the blood on the white dog was a pretty nice like clever image, just because this dog is white as the driven snow under most circumstances, so it really it looks really bad. And I don't know, so I think that this movie, even if the comedic premises, even in some of the lesser scenes, it's, even if the content of the joke didn't always make me laugh, I think the writers understood the mechanics of how to set up like a comedy scene, of how to introduce complications, how to like add the small like twist and like build off of that, how to keep elements running through from other scenes, and like let them have like a larger impact on the movie. I think that they were good at sort of weaving all those elements together, and with the bullet hole too, like it's something that keeps coming back. Like we have this is maybe closer to like a straight up kind of gross out scene, where they don't want to go to the hospital after Rachel McAdams shoots Jason Bateman on accident, and they don't want to go to the hospital because then the game would be up, his brother would be in trouble. So, she tries to like sew up the wound, and like it's like spurting blood, and she makes like a big cut, and it's gross. But it's not, the fact that it keeps coming back as an element is what I think makes it a successful scene in the broader arc of the film, as opposed to just kind of this singular gross out moment. Because then there's that extra, like, there's that scene that with the dog that it complicates and adds to. There's the fight at the end where the Bulgarian, the mob boss guy, like, throws a knife and it, like, goes directly into like the bullet hole, and like it ends up keeping, like, people keep like hitting it, and it just ends up being a element, something in the movie that is connective tissue as opposed to just a series of skits. It's got a good pace, aside from maybe the first like half hour. The first half hour is a little slow, but once the game gets started in earnest, once there's the big fight where the brother gets kidnapped by the Purge guys, the movie really starts picking up, both as a comedy and also as kind of a straightforward thriller. And I think it succeeds on both levels to varying degrees.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the first chunk of change of the movie was kind of a slog, honestly. I remember thinking for like the first probably 15 minutes, I think is a solid estimate.
Yeah.
Just that I'm like, this sucks. How did this get good reviews? If this movie continues like this, it's going to be another Hurricane Heist, because this is just slow. It's bad. It's just long, awkward pauses staring at other people. Like, I get what you're going for, but there's no initial pacing to make this pause work. It's just like, all right, can we get something going? Maybe, please? I mean, counterpoint, though, I do think the first probably 2 minutes when they're just setting everything up of Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams' kind of love story, I like that a lot. It was quick, it was punchy, it was a lot of showing, not telling type of thing. You got immediately, and you understood what they were going for, like what their life was about, who they were, and I think it worked really well in that spot. But then it screeched to a halt for a solid 12 minutes and just didn't do anything.
No, I completely agree, and I think it's really indicative of the movie as a whole as far as its strengths go, because Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams have great chemistry in this movie. The movie's the most fun when it's kind of focused on them. They get all the good comedic set pieces. They have good interactions with each other. And the first, like, 2 minutes, the montage, it's really cute. It's really cute. It's fun. It's good at kind of delivering that information. And where I think the movie, in general, after things get going, where I think the movie sort of suffers is with some of the other side characters who aren't our leads. Because you have then the dumb guy and the dumb, like, dude bro guy and the Irish lady, excuse me. That's I've fallen into the dumb guy's trap. But so you have that dude and the Irish lady, and they have their little, like, subplot and their little, like, back and forth. And there's some decent, I'm not above some, like, dumb guy humor, and I think there were a couple of good jokes with him. But overall, like, it just felt like it was sort of taking up space. And then the other main subplot with the other couple and their little argument about whether or not they had, like, cheated on each other, like, during their break. I thought the way that was introduced was funny, how we kind of get the explanation of, like, oh, like, we've been together, like, we're so cute and great for however long, and then she takes the drink when they say, like, you know, oh, like, I've never slept with a celebrity. Like, I think that's a good moment. And then I think the payoff of that subplot is kind of funny. Just, like, the picture of, finger quotes, Denzel Washington. I think that was pretty funny, but the problem is that those two characters don't really get anything else to do but argue about that. And it keeps coming up in scene after scene. And it really, we didn't need that much of it.
No, not at all. And, like, I didn't even think about it in the context of that's all that they do. But you're entirely right. Like, that is all that they do is argue about whether or not she slept with a celebrity, and it's boring is for lack of a better word. It's really boring. The setup and payoff isn't bad. As I said, I should preface that I didn't necessarily find this as funny. I think Jason Bateman comedies might just not be my shtick. That's not to say it's bad as a comedy. It's just not for me. But it definitely, even not necessarily enjoying all the comedy, I felt it when it bogged down.
Yeah.
Like there were definitely like, this isn't for me. Oh, this is just bad.
Yeah.
This just isn't good. So it definitely took a dive in the middle there. The one I would like to, though, kind of bring into the couple things that I really liked about the movie. Obviously, I thought the story was decent enough. I referred to it as, I don't think it was smart enough to pull off what we thought was going to happen, which we figured the Bulgarian was going to be the brother Brooks. Is kind of like the final plot twist of the movie, but like as it kind of went on, I'm like, you know what? I don't know that this is gonna happen. I don't know it's that smart. And sure enough, it was. And I thought actually for a little bit there that it was going to be the Irish British lady. I thought that would have also been kind of a clever little twist on it. And you know, she inadvertently showed up here, but wow, this worked out really well, type of thing. No, that doesn't really. It doesn't. Which is kind of a bummer to me. I would have liked a little bit more of a twist to the ending because it felt like it was kind of setting up for one. But beyond that, I credit where credit's due. I really liked a lot of the establishing shots, and I really liked a lot of the cinematography. The establishing shots I particularly want to talk about because I came away with it with one theory, and the significant other proposed a second alternative theory that I think is kind of really cool and fits in with the theming of the movie. The establishing shots basically kind of pan in, and it gives it kind of a cartoony, kind of tiny town look to the atmosphere, which makes sense as you're playing with like little board game pieces, and they look like little board game cars moving place to place and whatnot, which is really cool by itself, and I really like how it fits in with the movie and just looks good. I mean, you don't really need more of an excuse to do something other than that. But Sam proposed that it is also representative of the policeman's models, because the entire time, the policeman had a second murder party planned on top of the initial murder party, and like a whole bunch of stuff. And as the credits pan through, we see that he has, boards set up with yarn attaching things, and at one point it scrolls up through the yarn and we see that he has a model set up on top of one of his shelves in a similar style as the establishing shots, which is kind of cool with that context. Is kind of him looking to set things up in his own mind as well. I think it works on a couple levels there, and that's really cool.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that because I like that little sequence as a credits gag, but it does tie in really nicely. I hadn't thought of that. Kudos to Sam.
Yeah, it was a cool thought, and like as we were walking out, she was like, "Yeah, this is a thing that could have been," and I'm like, I like that a lot. It allows these already neat establishing shots to play on multiple levels. The other thing, as I said, I really like the cinematography in this movie. They did a lot of the... I'm sorry, I don't know a term for this. I got to look it up at some point. Where you have a camera fixed focused on an object. So like as you're doing a car chase, as opposed to the camera being level with the road watching the cars swerve, it's more attached to one of the cars. So the car is always in the exact same position in the scene, and essentially the world looks like it's moving around it. I think that's a really cool technique in general, and they use it a couple of times in this movie to really great effect. Like one time they're trying to unlock a door with a broom, and every time it hits, the lock kind of twists a little bit, and the camera moves with it, and it's jarring and adds a level of anxiety to the scene that, I mean, is obviously supposed to be there, and it just underscores it in a very nice way. And I like that type of shot construction a lot. So they do overdo it, I think, eventually. Like, I kind of got bored of seeing it, but it was cool in the beginning, and it stuck with it, and like it made sense in the movie.
Yeah, there are a couple things I could say that maybe get a little overdone that are kind of cool and clever, but eventually wear out their welcome. Like I did feel I think after the movie gets going, it does start to move at a better pace, but uh it did still feel like it could have been just a little bit shorter. Like you could have gotten this down to like a nice lean like hour and a half, you know. Let kind of the clever things, let the nice cinematography, like let the plot move at a brisk pace, like let it all not outstay its welcome, which maybe it does a little bit in parts. Um but yeah, I think that um in general though, like I was on board enough with uh our two main characters that when they were in focus, which was most of the time, uh and just sort of like doing fun things, I was willing to forgive kind of that flabbiness. Like I was able to just kind of enjoy myself a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's go to this movie. It's not a movie that you're gonna walk away with some grand theory about it, or it's no Annihilation. It's no Shape of Water or anything like that. There's arguably no greater point being made through it. Like even from kind of a social context around when it's being made. Like I'm digging for anything that I can see that this could relate to, but in general, it's just kind of it's a fun movie, and there's nothing wrong with that. Every now and again, just enjoying a movie. What's wrong with that?
I think there is something to be said for a movie that has a goal that's simple. That's not really all that ambitious. Like the goal is just to make you laugh. The goal is just to entertain you. And there are a lot of movies that will kind of hide behind this defense of it's not supposed to be Shakespeare or whatever. But I do think there's a lot to be said for a movie that has a simple goal and executes on that very well. A movie that is meant to make you laugh, that's meant to excite you. It does that. Doesn't really change your world in any way, but just ended up being a pleasant time in the theater. And this is a movie that I think does that. And I'm not normally that sort of person. Like, I do typically want a movie to either have some sort of meat in either way, like something for me to chew on as far as like thought-provoking in a good way, or kind of like problematic and like troublesome to like kind of ruminate over, because often I feel like a lot of movies that aim low end up being obnoxious. Like look at last week with the fucking hurricane heist. That was a movie that aimed low and completely missed the mark somehow still. In comparison, this is just this is a movie that aims low and does it with enough craft, with enough wit, with just enough of its own like unique little ideas to make it a good time. So I give this my wholehearted recommendation.
Yep, I would 100% agree with that. So I mean, if you listen to this entire thing despite our warning and haven't seen it yet, go see it. I don't think we really spoiled too much about the movie in general, and it's still a rollicking good time if you're into that type of movie. With that, though, we are going to call this somewhat shorter episode to a close. I have been, as always, your host, Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. That's MEKINDA. Or you can find me on my website, isortof.com. I've got all my information about my Twitch streams are on there, my Twitter page, some just nonsense I made in my spare time because I thought it was funny is on there, as well as I've got 2 articles posted on there as well that I think are actually pretty interesting articles. One about A Wrinkle in Time and why you shouldn't care about my opinions on it, and the other one is kind of about how film criticism is perceived by the public, and there's some scientific stuff that's backing it up. So go check that out. I think it's a good read. I wrote it.
I will give my wholehearted recommendation to Sean's website and his articles. It is a good read, can confirm. As for me, you can find me over on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller. I wrote a book, and I'm trying to get it published. So if you're a literary agent, hit me up.
I had water in my mouth. It almost came out my nose. If you want to keep up to date with the podcast and our funny jokes about the episodes as they're coming out, they're not very funny and they're barely jokes. Check it out at BADH_cast on Twitter. As always, we'd like to thank Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. Coming out next week is probably Isle of Dogs. I say probably just because it's possible that one of us, not naming names, Jackson, won't be able to get the movie given his current living situation. So we'll see. But
all right. Here's my advice. Here's my advice for aspiring content creators of any sort, particularly those who are interested in film. Don't move to a small town if you want to keep up to date on like all the new film releases, because most of them aren't going to come to you. Most of them, you'll probably have one theater with a couple screens, and it'll be like 3 of those screens will be whatever Marvel movie is currently playing. So,
they're still showing Ant-Man.
Maybe we'll get Age of Ultron next month. But hopefully we'll have Isle of Dogs for you. Hopefully Wes Anderson is notable enough that the cinema will want to have at least a few showings of it.
Man, it's small enough that it's a cinema. All right. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go